begin a minute early just to make sure we, give Marcus his respect and make sure he has his time to do this presentation. I'm Terry Price, Justice School Leadership Studies. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for finding your way over from the other hotel. I'm going to try to do 4 things in the presentation today. This is the beginning of work for me on followership. I finished a book that came out a year ago on ethics, leadership ethics, and now I'm starting to think about followership ethics, and the goal will be to publish another book that's kind of the companion for this. So this is initial thinking for me. First time I presented it, so it may be terrible. I have no way of knowing. You can judge. My daughter says I have way too many slides. She's 11 years old, and she now knows all about PowerPoint. So I have too many slides, not enough ziggy-zaggy things and other stuff. But I'll speed through them if I have to. I don't have a lot of text. I'm going to try to do 4 things. First is suggest that some of the same sources for immoral leadership, I talked about this in my last book, consequentialism and partiality, are also the root of ethical failures in followership. I'll talk a little bit about some of the standard typologies of followership and how I think they support these pressures toward consequentialism and partiality. I'll explain all that as we go along. I'll talk a bit about the possibility of conception of transforming followership and how that might respond to these pressures. And then the very last thing I'll do is I'll lay out the beginnings of my thinking about an ethical typology of followership. I think that followers expect rule breaking to some extent, rule breaking of leaders, and I'm going to suggest that's part of the cause of unethical followership. In part because they're committed to both consequentialism and partiality for followers as with leaders. Goal achievement matters, achieving the end matters, and in partiality matters, group members typically count for more. There's quite a bit of support for this in the literature. One way to articulate the commitment to consequentialism is to appeal to Ed Hollander's theory of idiosyncrasy credit, where leaders that are competent are allowed to emerge as leaders within a group and to deviate from common rules or expectations. By displaying competence with respect to the achievement of group goals, leaders gain status in the form of idiosyncrasy credit. Once they get this credit, they can use it to deviate from normal requirements. And in fact, followers expect them to deviate, to break the rules in a sense. Hollander says it's necessary for system progress, organizational way of talking about achieving the goals of the group. And he thinks it's grounded in the consent of followers, that followers consent to this. They allow leaders to deviate, to break the rules, to achieve the end. So that's the consequentialist part, achieving the goals. Partiality, I think you could probably defend this appealing to Hollander as well. But here I've been thinking more about Michael Hall's theory, social identity theory of leadership, where leaders get status and influenced by displaying prototypicality, by being prototypical members of the group, and that's the source of their status and influence. According to Hogg, prototypical members find the group is more central and important to self-definition. They're more likely to behave in group-serving ways, to favor the in-group over out-group, and as a result of this, they trust prototypical leaders, as he says, paradoxically allowing them to deviate from the rules. So in Hollander's case, kind of a consequentialist argument, to achieve the ends, followers are willing to let you break the rules. Right, that's why you get your status and influence. And on the social identity theory of leadership, prototypicality and this kind of group-based self-identification of leaders then builds a kind of trust in followers, which then causes them to allow leaders to be innovative, less conformist. There are lots of typologies of followership in the literature. I'm going to talk about 2 of the most famous ones. Robert Kelly, and here I've just listed the follower types that he discusses, and Ira Chalip more recently, and I'll go into each of these views in a little more detail. Here's Kelly's theory with followership styles, and you see, I imagine most of you are somewhat familiar with this, that followers differ on dimension of independent critical thinking versus dependent uncritical thinking and being active or passive. And you have the exemplary followers in the corner, they're both critical thinkers and active as well. The exemplary followers for Kelly he talks about them in terms of skills and relationships. And what I'm going to do is try to explain how I think these aspects of exemplary followership for Kelly link up with consequentialism and partiality, how they themselves create a pressure to be consequentialist, to focus too much on the ends and to focus too much on the group itself. So Kelly says some of the skills they have: focus and commitment, competence in critical path activities, and then relationships. I have these in caps because they're all section headings within the chapter. Relationships, building a team of individuals, a network, and working with the leader. I'll talk about each of these in turn as well. He says that exemplary followers are purposefully committed to something, a cause, a product, an organization, an idea, a person, in addition to their own lives and careers. And they display competence in critical activities. Once exemplary followers are committed to an important organizational goal, they put themselves on the critical path towards accomplishment. They find out what the bottom line is for the goal. So it's a kind of instrumental thinking. You have an end you want to achieve, you find the best means to achieve that end. It's very, very consequentialist. Relationships, best followers know how to get along with coworkers, and he talks specifically about working with teams, working with organizational networks, and working with leaders themselves. Okay, so now here's the link that I'm trying to make. When you talk about followers and their primary skills as being goal-focused and willing and able to get on the critical path towards success, that's a great pressure toward consequentialism. One of the things that I'm suggesting is a cause of ethical failures in leadership. Relationships are a good thing. It's great that we have them, but focusing too much on relationships, especially with people closest to oneself, creates these pressures of partiality, where you look out for their interest more than the interest of other people. So what I'm suggesting here is that on Kelly's theory, there's kind of a fairly strong focus toward consequentialism and partiality. Now, Kelly says that ethical failures of followership don't really, or he doesn't talk about this, he doesn't talk about it in terms of consequential or partiality, but instead in terms of pressures of authority. He says they face pressures of authority in the unique ethical situation in which they find themselves. Leader-follower dynamic encourages followers to turn their decision-making and ethics watching to the leader of the organization. They suffer from a kind of moral laziness, he says. So the bad followers are really the ones who turn things over to someone else, fall back, and they aren't active in the same way that active in critical thinking. And they're not active critical thinkers in the same way that the exemplary followers are. He goes on and he talks about this aspect of unethical or bad followers, and he makes the connection very nicely with conformist followers, passive followers, and pragmatic followers, that they're all kind of lazy. But he doesn't talk about the alienated follower, and I think the reason he doesn't is because it doesn't fit. The alienated follower isn't someone like this. The alienated follower isn't someone who's lazy, morally lazy. So what about the alienated follower? Here's the way Kelly describes the alienated follower. According to that person's own self-perception, he sees himself as a maverick, a skeptic, a devil's advocate, the organizational conscience, a defender of the little person, right? And then others may see this individual as being a cynic, a rebel, not a team player, adversarial. These are kind of good things. If there are pressures of authority, these can be quite good characteristics for someone to have. I'm going to suggest there also, or can also be, good qualities to have when you're facing pressures of consequentialism and partiality. So, the person who's the cynic may be questioning the way to achieve the goal, or whether the goal is valuable at all. So you're cynical, you're not idealistic enough. The defender of the little person may be someone who's saying we should be concerned about someone outside the group, not just group members. So for me, the alienated follower is much more morally interesting than Kelly lets on. Okay, another quote here from Kelly. When he's talking about the alienated follower in a way criticizing the alienated follower, he calls him a devil's advocate. But this is the very thing that he suggests the conformist follower ought to try to do. All right, so he himself recognizes there's something positive about it. I think he's also wrong in saying that the alienated follower isn't active. And the way he describes this person, the person is quite active. The person is making trouble, slowing things down. what I think he really has in mind, and after rereading these passages several times, is that what he thinks the exemplary follower is constructive in a way. The other person may be active, but they aren't constructive in the right kind of way. So the active passive distinction, I think, just isn't quite what we're looking for. So this is summary then. Give the time where I've gotten so far. I don't think Kelly's analysis does justice to the fact that there are these pressures of consequentialism and partiality. I think his account basically overlooks that. And he overlooks the fact that alienated followers have much more to offer ethically than you might at first assume. Chayla's followership style, this is 2005. Chayla doesn't explicitly describe his model as a response to this problem, but in a way it deals with the very form I'm talking about. He puts the characteristics of the alienated follower and the characteristics of Kelly's exemplary follower in this partner quadrant, right? Because now you've got support and challenge together. So the partner follower can be both a person who supports and a person who challenges, right? Which is the part of alienated followers that we thought might be promising in thinking about ethics. The way he does it, though, you might ask, well, how can a good follower be both challenging and supporting? Isn't there a tension there? And that tension probably explains why Kelly wanted to pull them apart in the first place. He does it largely by making leadership consequentialist and partial. And so the kind of support and challenge that a follower is going to show is going to be contingent upon especially goal achievement and looking out for the good of the group as a whole. And Chayla says our primary responsibility is to the common purpose. That's the consequentialism part. And those whom the organization serves. That's the partiality part. He says devoted followers enter a kind of sacred contract to pursue their common purpose. They're both guardians. They are both guardians of that purpose. Part of the courageous follower's role is to help the leader honor this contract. He talks about partiality in similar kinds of ways, and even raises the possibility that sometimes a moral action that you may feel compelled to engage in would threaten the organization itself. And he says if that's true, you do have kind of a dilemma, because you are committed, he thinks, to the group itself if the organization's purpose is good. And he says the minimal fallback position is to refrain from participating in the immoral or morally dubious behavior oneself. Chayla on rule breaking. Courageous follower assumes responsibility to limits where rules impede service and is willing to bend, circumvent, or break the rules to get things done. Okay, so real quick summary of what I'm saying about Chayla. I think he's right in putting some of these elements of the alienated follower together with the exemplary follower, because you want a follower to be ready to challenge and support. That builds in a kind of tension, though, that's hard to hang on to. Right? And the way he's able to sustain those two, put them together without having too much tension, is to say you're supporting or challenging in the service of the organization and its goals. Right? So you tack it onto something else, which then allows you to decide whether to challenge or support a particular leader in any circumstance. If that leader is working against the organization's goals and interests, then you're ready to challenge. If they're working for them, you're ready to support. But again, you have this real focus on consequentialism and partiality that I'm suggesting can be morally problematic. Okay, so a basic criticism of Chayla misses the fact that ethical pillars of followership are more than cases of collusion with the leader's behavior. We must also consider what we do that encourages it to continue these expectations of consequentialism and partiality. Pushing leaders to achieve the goals, pushing leaders to focus only on the interest of the group. Last typology I'll mention, which anyone seen Burns' typology of followers before? Anyone familiar with this? It's kind of odd, isn't it? I mean, we always think about Burns in terms of transforming leadership. He talks quite a bit about followers, and there's a lot of organization in the text of different types of followers. It's spread throughout the book. You see, we have some things from page 68, some from 135 to 137. So it's scattered. There's no nice matrix or anything, but he does a lot to lay out types. The people he calls are true followers I have on the left. They're actually engaged in the process for some reason or other. The ones on the right he calls latent followers. They're apathetic, anomic, alienated, excluded, maybe pushed out from society, not able to participate. And these are the ones he focuses on when he's talking about transforming leadership. The role of the transforming leader is to try to get these people in the process. It says, heroic, transcending, transforming leadership excites the previously bored and apathetic. It recreates a political connection with the alienated. It reaches even the wants and needs of the anomic and shapes their motivations. And he gives examples, Lenin, Gandhi, and Mao. Okay, so he has these follower types that he's fairly explicit about, though they're not incredibly organized in the text. And then he has a role for leaders in dealing with followers, and the role is to bring them into the process, to motivate them, and as you all know, to bring them to higher levels of motivation and morality. And what he has in mind there is primarily getting people to move away from self-interest to think about the collective good, to be involved in the leadership process. This creates a little bit of a problem, I think, in Burns' theory. He's been criticized for this because it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for followers to do things. So you have this, you say leaders and followers are raising each other to higher levels of motivation and morality. Burns says that. But it looks like, and he says this, that the leaders are at a higher level of motivation and morality. So what exactly do followers do? What's their role going to be? And so people criticize the theory sometimes for being too hierarchical, too top-down, as much as he wants it to be a fairly egalitarian theory. And it is egalitarian in the sense that everyone's interests matter. He wants everyone to be counted and to be a part of the process. But you still have this concern, what exactly do followers do? What are they in a position to do? And he doesn't tell us very much about that. I'm going to suggest that there may be a different developmental role for followers, and that's to be this kind of check on exactly those pressures I was talking about earlier, the pressures of consequentialism and partiality. This is, I don't want to say half-baked. Not half-baked, just not fully developed. But my thinking is that one role for someone who's a transforming follower, and maybe the primary role, would be to serve as this kind of check on leaders and on other group members, to make sure that people aren't blinded by consequentialism, aren't blinded by trying to achieve the goal of the group, and aren't blinded by partiality. There are incredible pressures, as I said, within the group to focus only on the interests of the group. Someone needs to be there thinking about the interest of outsiders. It's particularly difficult, I think, for leaders because they have an incredible cognitive load, incredible expectations to achieve, incredible expectations to look out for the interests of group members. So it's hard, maybe not impossible, but hard for them to do it. I think to think about, focus enough on the needs and to focus enough on the interests of outsiders. And it may be an important role for followers, maybe even something we might call transforming followers. So how does this model fit into some kind of typology? What I've done here is to create two axes, one a focus on the means and one a focus on the ends, one a focus on impartiality, everyone's interest, and the other focus on partiality, the interest of group members. And then I've given names to these categories. The one I'm most fond of is the autonomous follower, which I think has these elements of the exemplary follower. The autonomous follower will be someone who commits to something, keeps promises, and my conception will be fairly Kantian. Someone who, when the person is able morally to do what he or she has committed to doing, then that person will do it. So you can get the kind of support and commitment you need of a follower, but also autonomous in the sense that this person is unwilling to do what's immoral, unwilling to use immoral means to achieve the ends of the group. So this person is going to have this follower have a real focus on the means and on impartiality, thinking of people outside the group. In the left-hand quadrant, I call this individual the universalist, who I think Burns fits this category. Burns his theory is very impartial. The good of everyone matters, but it's very much in focus. Burns calls the values the end values, and the end values are more important than the modal values. The modal values are basically the means. And when he talks about the means as having any importance, he says, well, they're important in part because if you use the wrong means, you can undermine the end. So they have instrumental value. And I've asked him point blank before, if you have to choose between the two, which one do you pick? And he says you have to pick the ends. The ends matter more, the end values. So you might think of someone in the left-hand quadrant as a universalist follower. The bottom left-hand, I've called the organizational follower, in part because there's a real sense in, the goals have already been picked. You know what it is you're doing. You know what your job is. You're trying to achieve these ends. Who's the group? The group is us, the organization. It's kind of fairly, or in most cases, fairly enclosed and well-defined. And then I had to have something. My social scientific friends tell me you have to fill all the squares in, and so I had to have something for the quadrant 3. I call this person the traditionalist, who is really committed to the group and may get morality out of the group, defined by group roles, but also concerned about the means and rules, right? Less about achieving something, but about strictures of behavior. I haven't thought a whole lot about this, but you can even think about followers who are really committed to sexual rules or other kinds of things. Like there are certain actions you just don't engage in, and those actions are wrong in and of themselves. I'm 21 minutes in, and I need to stop in 9 minutes. So I think I'm going to stop now and let you ask me questions. Now that I've laid the view out, I can try to clarify anything that wasn't clear. I know I went quickly.
Is it your contention that it's the role of the follower or the role of the leader? And I'm getting a little bit mixed up in terms. To not be morally lazy, to not allow the follower to be morally lazy, to allow the follower, for example, to be more autonomous or partner. What's the role of the organization in helping the follower move there?
Yeah, that might be the next step. There has to be some mechanism for making this possible. I mean, some people are in a position where they can't. You say you should be autonomous, but I can't. So there has to be an organization or a group where it's difficult for people to do this. There's some mechanism for encouraging it, for encouraging people to be autonomous. I mean, I guess I have a background assumption here that followers are exerting these pressures themselves toward consequentialism and partiality. It's not just the leader saying, we need to achieve these ends. I'm looking out only for you, so now do it, and the follower's role is fairly passive. My assumption is that a lot of what's going on is these pressures are coming from the followers themselves. So it will be part of their job, the job of followers, to be autonomous, to act autonomously, to say, well, wait a minute, we can't be so goal-focused so in-focused we forget about the means. We can't be so focused about our own interests that we forget about the interests of people outside of us. So I am suggesting that followers should not be morally lazy. I agree with Kelly on that count. That you need this active component, and even maybe something like the way he describes the alienated follower.
So what would be the role then of would a follower be morally lazy if their only model was moral laziness? Therefore, they couldn't differentiate between their own behavior and morality.
Say that one more time.
Well,
please.
To say a follower is morally lazy would say to you, look, just get your poop in a group and become moral. As opposed to somebody who goes, I don't quite know what morality is. My only model has been this. And we look at that and go, boy, that's pretty morally corrupt.
Yeah. And
they don't distinguish between the two.
Well, here may be another background assumption of this view. And I said that the argument I'm making is fairly Kantian, and that every rational agent has the capacity to think for him or herself, and to access morality through his or her own reason. Now that's debatable. You may not like that view, but part of one assumption is that we're able to do this. That people are able to think, this action is not a moral action, and here's why. And Kant has his own theory; it can be universalized, and has the capacity to see everyone else as being a moral agent. You're different from me, different organization, different country, but you're still a rational agent the same way I am, deserving of the same kind of respect. So I think you're honing in on a big assumption of the theory I'm trying to develop.
Okay.
Yes.
I was wondering that too, but in addition, maybe the theory X is what Shalom is picking up when he added another chapter in his second edition. And you've seen that it's where the leader is being a little more proactive in finding ways for the follower to be more assertive.
Yeah. No, I think Shalom is really on to something.
I think.
And when I picked up the book the first time, I didn't think I was going to get as much from it as I did. And there's really a lot. It's very read. It's very readable, easily accessible. But there's a lot of deep thinking going on in that book, and so I think there's something to it. Yes, in the back.
I'd like to ask you, what do you think about the role of ethical trainings for moral development and followers and leaders in organizations?
The role of training. I'm kind of at the front end of this project, and what people always ask me, and this is the hardest part, is, okay, now if you're right, and you've got all this theory worked out, what can we do next? I'll take a quote from this morning. I don't know. And I may never know, because sometimes what I kind of get to, I'm fairly theoretical. And so I'll get to a point where I think this is the right model. And then if someone else thinks it's the right model, let's figure out, or help me figure out, work with me to figure out what you might do in training. I mean, it's true everyone has a capacity, I think, to think morally for themselves and to see other people as rational agents. But that doesn't mean they can do it just themselves, because it may depend on the context. You may need to set things up in such a way that people can recognize that capacity and develop that capacity. Kant said we all have obligations to develop the rational autonomy of others. And one of our, we have a duty to ourselves to develop our own rational autonomy and act as rational agents. And we have duties to other people to make sure they're able to do it as well. So if we're not doing that for followers and people generally, then we're not meeting all our duties. It'd be a separate question, like, how exactly would you do that then? What kind of techniques would you use to help people? Maybe thinking about moral problems. Maybe that's part of it.
No, different also.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't have very much familiarity with the models that you've been talking about, but I was wondering about the role of what happens with competition and also desire to connect to the leader in ways that I'm using the word morality quite a bit, and I understand that that's part of the models that you're talking about, but there is something to be said for people, followers competing with each other and having a different agenda outside of morality. Is there any ways to get to that?
I don't know. I mean, Hollander's work, all these social exchange theories talk about different places for different followers, because the relationship is one of exchange. Some followers can develop their own kinds of contracts with particular leaders. So I'm attracted to that model as an explanation, generally. I haven't thought about it in a moral context. It will be true, I think, that the same kinds of moral rules that apply to treatment of outsiders will apply to the treatment of insiders. So you will have competition within the organization. You have to have. But there have to be rules on how you do that. And there have to be moral rules that stop you from, I can't try to take resources from you by lying or breaking promises or setting you up to fail or anything else. So there has to be, whatever competition there is, it has to be bound by morality. And sometimes these other models, they all have moral elements and they also have morality, but they're not explicitly moral models. That's all we know.
I think that's coming from the perspective of the conscious and the unconscious, the rational and the irrational.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're motivated by irrational forces that don't necessarily allow us to behave.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's another assumption you're appealing to in my model, which is, Kant is very much Enlightenment and very, I'm trained in philosophy, is very much rational. And I had a discussion this morning at the keynote session with my group, and I said, the basic assumptions of what's happening here is very different from the kind of models that I work with. It was very unconscious and emotive and just I have 1 minute. I want to be, yes.
I have one quick question. I was wondering if leadership effectiveness can be a function of the type of followership. What I am trying to understand is that, for example, given one leader and he is working with other 4 types of followership, the end result will be the same, or it will be dependent on the type of the follower. For example, if a leader is working with autonomous, the results will be the leadership effectiveness will be higher or not. But I am wondering if this, and my second question is that is there a type of survey or questionnaire that we can identify the types of followers according to typologies you have presented? Thank you.
I think there's some work being done on identification of followers. Dr. Kelly's done some of this stuff. So that's the second question. Real quickly on the first one, mine's meant to be a moral model, and as a moral philosopher, I guess I'm inclined to say, if this is the right moral model, to hell with effectiveness. And it may turn out that the autonomous follower isn't always the most effective person to have around. Now, it will be. I mean, because really this model is going to compete with goal achievement in some cases. The autonomous follower is willing to do what he or she's been asked to do and committed to do as long as it's within the bounds of morality. If it turns out the goals are something that require immoral behavior, then you're going to get incredible ineffectiveness, because the hope is that these people will say, the autonomous follower will say, no, I'm not going to do it. We just have to be ineffective in this case. I'm going to stop, and I think I may have gone 1 minute over, and I apologize. Thank you very much.
So welcome. Thank you so much for coming to this presentation. To be honest, I'm a PhD student from Aston Business School. This is part of my PhD. And this is the biggest crowd I've ever presented from now. So there's going to be nerve-wracking. Probably everything is going to go wrong today. So let's just hope everything goes well. This is part of a 3-study project for my PhD. I conducted 3 separate studies on the mediating effects of trust in leadership, the relationship between leadership behaviors and follower outcomes. This is just the first study, which I conducted with students from Aston Business School, but there were students who had work experience that went 1 year full-time placement in the white-collar sector. But before I get to that was the main aim of this study and of this presentation, is to determine the mediating role of trust in the relationships between leadership behaviors and follower motivation and self-efficacy of followers. Now, before I get to the actual study and to the model, one thing I think is quite important for this study is to understand what type of trust I'm actually looking at. It's a growing field. More and more research is done on trust in leadership and OB in general. Now I picked two definitions which are really relevant to my study. The first 2 are really about a rational evaluation, calculation of what are the benefits for me. If I trust you as a leader, what will I get in return? Are there any benefits? So it's a rational calculation. Do I get something in return? Now the second 2 are Rousseau and Ring and Vanderbilt. They're really looking at the psychology of leadership, the psychology of trust. They say it's a psychological state. So it doesn't just mean I'm thinking economically, what will I get out of it? It's about I'm going to put myself in a position where you can actually hurt me. So I'm vulnerable. And if you don't know, and I hope that is part of the trust process. I hope that you're not going to harm me. You're not going to abuse me. So these are the two different things. These are the relevant definitions for my study. The economic calculation, what are the benefits, and a psychological state. I'm going to put myself in a situation, in a position where I'm vulnerable. I'm exposed to you as a leader. Now, that's based the underlying model. Leadership behaviors, I got 8 different dimensions of leadership. I took the questionnaire from Kester Fries from INSEAD and his colleagues, the Global Life Inventory, which is a 12-dimensional questionnaire, but I only used 8 dimensions. But it's beyond the scope of this presentation to go through the process. It had conceptual reasons and statistical reasons why I only used 8 of their 12 dimensions. And basically, that just shows you. I looked at the 8 different dimensions, and I wanted to see what's the mediation, or what's the role of individual trust between all these 8 different dimensions and the total outcomes. The trust measure I used from Young and Avolio, motivation, Van de Ven and Ferry, I looked at work effort and internal self-motivation, and checks and Police's self-efficacy scale. The reason why I chose these scales was the established scales. As a PhD student, one of the things I learned quite quickly was don't risk too much, because you have to survive a VIVA, which I have coming up in 4 weeks. So I hope to be on the safe side with these scales, with these people. Now, what I did on these, I was lucky. I was a lecturer at Aston for 2 years, and I managed to collect 207 questionnaires from students. I had around 350 students in total, but because it was voluntary, I couldn't force them. Unfortunately, we have ethics. No, not unfortunately. So I only got 207, which is still all right. I used Breach and High's macro instead of the Sobel test. Simple reason. I came across Breach and High's when I learned a lot about mediation, how to test it, and it has a couple of advantages. The Sobel test, what they claim, Breach and High's and Holmberg, was it might overestimate type 1 and type 2 errors. So it might overestimate the confidence, confidence levels. And also what it does, and that's really important, is bootstrapping. So it takes little sub-samples of a big sample and checks for confidence intervals, the range. So it has a couple of advantages, but I'm not going into depth in this presentation. But I just want to show you, I used a different measure than what we usually use, the Barron and Kenny and the Sobel test. Now, the only reason why I put this in was because what I thought was very interesting. When I gave my lectures, I always said what's well known in the academic and practitioner world, there are more male leaders than female leaders. For some reason, in my sample, very equal. They were all in consultancies, investment banking, and marketing, my students. So it might have been that there are more women it seems like it, there are more women in these industries than men, as when it comes to middle-level management, at least. So I thought that was very, very interesting. Another interesting point was that I had half and half in terms of students. I was quite surprised, because I always thought I had more male students. Because maybe that was just a bias from my side. I always thought, well, man and leadership, that's probably more their thing. But I was really positively surprised to find an equal balance again. So the future is holding quite a lot, because these are graduates. These are the people entering the UK job market at the moment. The average age was around 22 years. So these are the graduates we're looking at. Our future workforce, in particular in the UK, because that's a UK sample. Now, looks quite difficult. I'm going through it in a minute in more depth, but I just want to talk about the 4 dimensions you see here. As I said, they were developed at INSEAD. Visioning is really about having a vision. Some of these items or dimensions are very similar to transformational leadership, and servant leadership falls into it. So it's a very good measure. Empowering is really about getting your people involved. What we know, getting your people involved helps to motivate. We know that. It helps to motivate your people. Energizing is really about, to sum it up, being a role model. Showing your people where you're going. As Kester Fries said in his article from 2004, walk the talk. And that's really what it's all about. Designing and aligning, and that I found quite interesting, because when I started my PhD 3 years ago, I was always told, well, when it comes to intrinsic motivation, don't set too many guidelines, let people have autonomy. And you'll see it's actually quite different in my study, and actually all the 3 studies I looked at. Designing and aligning is about setting performance standards, setting clear guidelines. Where do my people need to go? What I found was that all of these dimensions are mediated through trust in the leader. So what that means is, if I have a vision and I'm the leader, my followers won't believe me or won't be intrinsically motivated if they don't trust me. So basically what that means is, if I have a vision, I need my people to trust me. Otherwise, they might, as we know from authentic leadership of Basin Steidelmeier, who said, it has to be genuine what you do as a leader. And that's the same here. If you have a vision, it has to come across as genuine, and you achieve that through trust in the leader. The same here, empowering and energizing. If you get your people on board, and I always said to my students, because a few years ago I met a friend from Japan, and he said to me, well, in Japan we would never sell a company, because a company to us is a baby. So we would much rather die. Yet that's his words. We would much rather die than sell our own company, because it's what we developed, what we established, it's our baby. Same here with empowering. If you get your people on board and you make it theirs, they're involved in the decision-making process. They trust you. Respectively, it has a positive effect on intrinsic motivation, but we know that. But that only works again if you have trust in the leader. So, in being involved in the decision-making process only works, only has a positive effect, not only, but has a positive effect indirectly through trust. How much time do I have? Oh. Energizing designing. Same thing here again. If you're a role model, it has to come across as genuine. And how do I achieve that? Through trust. If my people trust me, then they feel intrinsically motivated if I walk the talk. If I only walk the talk and no one trusts me, it might have an effect at all. And performance standards, and that's why I mentioned it earlier. When I started, I always thought too many rules are bad for intrinsic motivation. But it appears that too many rules, not too many, but rules and guidance are very important if your followers trust you as a leader. Putting it in different words, setting a guideline as a leader has a positive effect because your people, if they trust you, because your people think, well, they're doing it for my own good. My benefit is I know where I'm going. And it also might add to something called social loafing. If I have performance, if I trust my leader to only set these guidelines because it's for the best of me and the group, then I know or I expect social loafing to be minimized. So that's what falls into that category as well. Now, I find that most interesting because my background before I did my PhD was in a very, well, nowadays a very bad PhD. I used to be an investment banker, and when I first started reading about motivation, and I read that rewards, money is bad for motivation, intrinsic motivation, I always thought, nah, that can't be. The funny thing is, I found the same with in all my 3 samples, and I looked at workforce, average age around 35. I looked, and that's the study with the graduates, 22 average age. I found this in all 3 studies that if you have trust, or if you trust your leader, your intrinsic motivation levels go up. And again, it might be because we know this from feedback and verbal praise. That actually increases intrinsic motivation because we can use it as a reinforcement mechanism. So if you tell your people, yes, that's great what you've done. There are some things you have to achieve, some things you have to do better, then I know it's a reinforcement effect. I know I've done something right. What I've enjoyed wasn't all bad. Same with rewards. So if there's trust in the leader, the rewards might be considered a reinforcement tool. So in other words, it might be that through the trust in the leader, I have a sort of guideline where I'm standing. Hence, I'm intrinsically more motivated to achieve more, not for the external motivator money, but because it's a reinforcement tool. I know because I didn't get the whole bonus, I have to do a bit more. But I still enjoy doing it. So I found that very interesting, because it refuted what I first read about intrinsic motivation and money. Team building as well. Team building is all about having a collaborative environment, having a great team, working together, not just having a crowd of people, not just having a group, but having a proper team, walking in the same direction. And again, I found intrinsic motivation again is positively affected through individual trust. So I trust my leader, again, social loafing, I trust my leader to set up an environment where I can work freely, I can make mistakes, but I know it's always for the best. Again, it might minimize social loafing. Tenacity and emotional intelligence. Tenacity is simply, you stick up for your principles, you do what you agreed previously with your team, and you'll defend that. When it comes to external groups or external leaders, you will defend your decisions you made within the team. And that, if you trust your leader to do anything that's beneficial to the individual and the group eventually, that will indirectly affect intrinsic motivation. The emotional intelligence, well, we know trust is part really of emotional intelligence because it's such a close relationship. Again, it indirectly affects intrinsic motivation. Now I also looked at work effort, just simply working harder. It makes sense. Again, having a vision, if you trust your leader, if you have trust in the vision, and it's only for your own good, it will increase work effort. Because again, it's yours, the vision is yours. Because you have trust in the leader that's beneficial for you, it will increase indirectly work effort. And again, the same things from empowering, energizing, designing, and aligning. Now, one thing I noticed, and I thought that was quite interesting, was team building. Team building is not indirectly affected through trust in the leader. What that means, that's just an assumption. If this continues, if this shows up in more studies, and I want to conduct a few more studies on that, then the question might be, simply trusting my leader might not be enough to work harder, just because I have a collaborative environment. So if I'm a follower, and I work in a very good team, and I trust my leader, that might not be enough to work harder. Social loafing, again, because simply trusting my leader doesn't mean that I trust my colleagues. So if I work harder but I do not trust my colleagues, how do I know that they're not just going to sit back, relax, and say, wonderful, that's so wonderful, he's working hard, why bother? So trusting the leader itself isn't enough for this relationship. It seems to be that'd be interesting to see if maybe trust in colleagues or organizational policies have a greater effect and then influence that relationship. And again, tenacity, emotional intelligence, same thing, stick up for your principles. If your leaders trust you to do that, again, it increases their work effort. Simply, if we think about it, I know what I'm working for, I know what I'm doing will get us results, and it will be for our own benefit. Now, that I found quite interesting, because I always thought, and again, that's when I first started my PhD, that it's really important for a leader to do certain things to increase self-efficacy for leaders. So increase your beliefs in your own ability. In none of the studies I found any effect. And again, this is for 3 different studies. I had a total of around 700 or 800 people from different industries and so forth. There isn't a direct nor an indirect effect. So it seems that our self-efficacy beliefs come from somewhere else. Maybe it's our colleagues, maybe our partners, maybe the organization. I don't know. But leadership seems to be, and I know this is in contrast to what other studies have found. But for all of my studies, there doesn't seem to be a direct effect, nor an indirect effect. as mentioned. Why that is, I don't know. Maybe we take our beliefs in ourselves from somewhere else. And the same here. Doesn't matter whether I give you a reward. Doesn't matter whether I listen to you, as I would do if I'm an emotional intelligent leader, or we have a closer relationship. None of this seems to affect self-efficacy in any way. Now, the aim, as I said, was to test the mediating role of trust in the leadership and follow outcome relationships. For motivation, intrinsic motivation and work effort, this worked quite well. Trust in the leader is an important mediator in the leadership-follower relationships. Self-efficacy is not, except for deciding, aligning, and rewarding feedback. They were the only ones that had a direct effect. But again, trust in the leader did not mediate this relationship. And what does this mean for us, not for us as leaders, but for leaders? If you want to improve or increase intrinsic motivation, work effort amongst your people, and you're dealing with young people around the age of 22, be aware of how important the trust is these young people have in you. So if you're dealing with new graduates, be aware that their trust in you will determine your effectiveness when it comes to increasing their motivation and work effort. Their ability, however, as leaders, their ability to affect follow self-efficacy is really limited. So it might be that these young people simply look around their friends and look how they do it, might compare themselves, or might wait for feedback from their friends or colleagues. Or it might be, that just came to me as well, it might be that it needs more interaction with the leader. Could be another thing as well. I don't know. But these are basically implications and contributions theoretically. That pretty much sums up the whole study. I hope I didn't do it too quickly, but I realized this morning that was way too long. So I tried to do that fast. So if you have any questions, feel free. And it's good for my live in a couple of weeks as well. So if you tear me apart, I know my live is going to be in jeopardy in a couple of weeks. So thank you. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah.
By the way, if that's your first presentation, that's pretty darn good.
Oh, thank you.
You talked about the follower work effort and intrinsic motivation occurring through followers' trust in the leader, except for team building. When you measured the team building component, did you look at which stage of development the team was in?
No, I didn't.
I'd suggest that would have an impact on that. That if the team was in what you'd call storming, forming norm stages, or Blanchard's team development stage 1 or 2, that they would require greater trust in the leader. But as they moved into the other two, the trust would need to be spread throughout the colleagues.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That might be something to consider in your
that's a really good point. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have the chance in this study.
Okay,
that's a very good point in the future. Yeah.
And with listening to both presentations, I was just wondering how these results, how important is it that these studies were done in the United States? So how general are these results? Do they also apply to the European situation?
It's a good question. I was thinking exactly this morning, walking through Prague. And that's not bad, right? It's a great city. But I noticed that is in my hotel that's very different, the way they interact with each other. It might just be my perception. So because that's a UK sample, UK and USA, we know that from the global study, it's always very similar. So it would be really interesting to do something like that in the Czech Republic, or in Germany, or in other European countries, or other Asian countries.
Because I was thinking trust, that's a very good reason. A lack of trust to get rid of the leader.
Yeah.
I mean, even legal grounds, that's a good reason to fire.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It would be very interesting to do that, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I have one question. I'm trying to understand the research setup. As far as I understand, you have like questionnaire from INSTEM, the Global Leadership Inventory.
Yeah.
As I understand, it's 360 feedback.
It is, yeah.
And so when you were analyzing your results, you use self-assessment or participants was working in a group of people, so they received information about their leadership behaviors.
You rated. I didn't use the self-assessment one. I used to rate it because it was simply. I would have loved to do the 360 because that would be really interesting to do both the self-assessment as well. But I didn't have access to the leaders themselves. I only had access to the followers, so I could only do one of them. But that would be interesting as well. Thanks.
Yeah, both papers speak to me of something I've been struggling to articulate, and now I'm going to try to do it out loud. And that is, there's a kind of paradox in the notion of leadership for transformation. It seems to me that both studies suggest that somehow the leader is responsible for the state of mind or the self-efficacy or the whatever of the follower, and at the same time, at least the first particularly, emphasize the freedom of the follower to find their own state of mind and bring that to the leader. And your observation on self-efficacy says the same thing to me, that the follower has the freedom to find his or her own place in the context of this leader-member cohort. But at the same time, the leader, we're starting to evolve a body of theory that assigns to the leader a perspective, a responsibility, a power around not controlling, but influencing, owning, touching the follower's state of mind and ability to do his thing. So it seems like it's a paradox. You can't do both. You can't have freedom to lead, freedom to follow, and have a control kind of relationship.
Yeah.
I think I think you're right. There's this tension you're always playing with in leadership and the followership, especially giving people an active role in the process. That you can't understand them as the kinds of individuals who are completely controlled by the outside. They have to have something there. And I think it's so easy to overlook because. As much as we all try not to focus just on a leader, your eyes go there, and there's more going on. That's why the more I think about leadership ethics, the more I think followers have a role in the good and the bad. So part of what I have to say, I think, is that they have a bigger role to play in the bad that goes on than people have thought before. So being included is not always a good thing, because you may get included and blamed at the same time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because it changes the organizational culture. I always think of anyone when I think of leadership ethics. That's just, yeah.
What was I think you said the age was, were they in the workplace? I guess I'm wondering, how long had they been in the workplace if they were?
A minimum of 1 year full-time, because that was their placement. But I had students kind of say something about our educational system, at least in the UK nowadays. I had some students who've worked more than 3 years with the same department, not the same leader, but in a lot of cases with the same department full-time. And I knew one guy from Societe Generale who did that full-time, and just did university on the side. So it was a minimum of a year, to answer your question.
And they just had to pick one leader that they worked for if they moved jobs?
Well, I asked them to reflect upon their experience on their placement. Because the time span between the placement and the questionnaire was around 4 or 5 weeks, so they could be reflected upon it. And in other cases where some of the students told me where they've been working with their leader longer or shorter in some cases, so well, is it possible to reflect? If not, reflect upon who you've been working with for more than a year. So I always make sure that it's a minimum of a year, not just someone that knew for a week. Yeah.
I would like to ask you about research methods. You can use your research, and what do you think about the role of qualitative research methods? What do you think of qualitative research methods?
Qualitative? It'd be very interesting to do qualitative research, but I didn't. I only did quantitative. In all 3 studies, I only did quantitative. I think your first question was what kind of methods did I use? For the mediation, I used Bridge and Heiss macro. I actually used their syntax, but I have a macro you can download online. It's a wonderful tool, and they're very helpful. I spoke to Professor Bridge, who's based, I think, at Ohio University, and they're very helpful. I asked them about a couple of things about bootstrapping. Really good for that. I used a lot of confirmatory factor analysis for it as well, some structural equation modeling as well. There were so many different processes in it because I had to not redevelop, but I had to amend the questionnaire for my own purposes as well. But without it, I used the breach and heights macro, and I used HLM, high coordinate modeling as well. Yeah.
When you use less factors in the instrument, did you get permission from the owner of the instrument to modify it? And how does that affect?
I got permission to use it, yeah. And then
I mean, to modify it.
Oh, I didn't. No, I haven't published anything yet, so that's.
I just wondered how that.
I'm still.
What affects the side effects of the instrument?
I tested all of that. Yeah, obviously I tested all the reliabilities, all the intergroup reliabilities. Now I made sure that everything was, as I said, I need to pass my mother before we so I should have all of that. But yeah, that's it's something. When it comes to permission, it's something I want to send Kets to Freeze anyway in this team because they asked. Because I always update them on my progress, and I said I want to have a copy of that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.